know how to start, so I guess I'll just start. Um, this is just going to be a discussion on kind of what I see as the current state of things in the world. Uh, I, I will say that I guess the viewpoint I'm coming at it from is less of a policy focused uh, kind of view on things. It's more of a, I guess, a historicized view. Because my background again is, I guess no one would know, but my background is I studied history, so that is kind of the lens at which I look at the world. It's like through a historicized view of things. So I'm not gonna go. This discussion will go too in depth on matters of matters of culture that don't kind of affect the overall geopolitical situation. And I guess a big caveat is, you know, I'm as well informed as I can be. I'm not the most, I guess, well versed person on this. If you're taking your geopolitics or your politics in general from a loser on the internet, that's kind of an L on you. So, I yeah. So that being said, I guess let's just start. I'm not sure how long this will be, and I'm not sure like how in depth I want to go. But let's start. Let's start. I guess let's leave the current conflicts kind of to the end because I feel like those conflicts are kind of more indicative of the outcomes of long-standing, I guess, troubles. The these states like the states out this that the long-standing troubles that many of these states have. So let's start with I guess south to north. Usually people go from north to south. They focus on I guess the major powers, but I feel like it's important to kind of take stock at the kind of the side characters as it were of geopolitics. Um, I know that's like kind of messed up to say it, but it is the truth. Let's start with Oceania, Australia, New Zealand. The current state, I guess, of that region of the world is very much the. It seems very much the same. I know they're still dealing with current immigration issues with people from Indonesia and further afield trying to float over to them. Um, I guess the benefit that these two areas have over many places in the world is that they are so isolated. You know, they're so isolated and very much insulated from a lot of like Australia. I don't think anyone in Australia is concerned about invasion or nuclear weapons being used against them. Like they're not significant enough. And as a Canadian, saying that about Australia that is pretty. That's a pretty. I guess, I guess bold statement, but yeah, they're not very significant. New Zealand the same. I think they're. I'm pretty sure their major outports for Australia. I think is still mineral resources, and I think tourism is a big industry in both of them. I guess the big issues that this region is facing is less for New Zealand, more for Australia, is global warming. They are continuously facing issues of increased desertification, and I guess a big issue they seem to have currently is invasive species. They were very much adamant trying to protect their native fauna, which is fair enough. So these seem like Oceania is such a flyover. I guess going another same region is Indonesia and Polynesia in general. This is a bit more interesting. Indonesia is is a growing power. It seems like recently I saw statistically that it is now uh, markedly cheaper to manufacture in Indonesia over elsewhere in the world. Their positioning in the in the South Asia Sea uh, is extremely powerful. Um, they control most shipping lanes in and out of the region. Um, I guess big problem they have would be similar to Australia, but to a lesser extent agriculturally. I'm not. I don't think they could. They're very food. They produce enough food. I know most of the Indonesian archipelago is rainforest and some mountained and some mountains. Um, Population's healthy. Um, I think their future outcome is probably very positive. For Polynesia in general, Polynesia uh, a is such a broad kind of like wastebasket term. By Polynesia, I more so mean like all the islands scattered across Pacific. Their kind of major problems is just global warming and due to possible ocean levels rising and continued erosion, some of these islands may have troubles, uh, in the coming decades over just like trying to keep their trying to keep like above the waves. And again, these areas have major issues with food pricing because so much of their almost all their food has to be has to be shipped in. Not a lot of these places have like areas for airstrips, so most of it has to be shipped in. So food prices would be crazy. Um, Next area I want to just because these areas are, I guess, they're important, right? Like I don't want to come across saying like Indonesia, like Australia, these are unimportant regions, right? But for the current uh, geopolitical kind of climate, they're not so much hot zones. I know Indonesia does have issues with its Muslim community. I know that Indonesia, I think, is the largest Muslim country in the world. I know that they've had problems with native Hindus and Buddhists in the region. But yeah, and I know we could probably have a whole podcast series just on the politics of Indonesia. It's a very ethnically diverse area, so I don't want to seem like this is not they're unimportant, but just as a flashpoint, they're not really of much current discussion. My next area would be broadly, again, this is such a broad term, like sub-Saharan Africa. This region right now, I think, is in the southern hemisphere probably the most important place to be looking at. Um, right now, there are multiple conflicts going on within sub-Saharan Africa. Well, they've always been going on, but a lot of these ones have intensified. I know there is still the war in the Congo. There is uh, the the floating idea of the East African Federation, centered around Lake Victoria, the smaller African nations there. Um, South Africa still kind of struggling. I could put it very bluntly, and the region in general has been more so an interest now of outside parties. We'll come to them when we get there, but right now, sub-Saharan Africa is so vitally important. More so because a lot of these places, a lot of these economies in the region are trending upwards pretty well. I know, like Nigeria is doing very well economically speaking, um, and a lot of these places have the potential to do so well because the big thing with Africa that's always been the big thing is resources. They have such an abundance of natural resources. It's wild. Um, and we'll get to that kind of touch point when it comes to uh, the interested nations on it. But right now, they're the issue they're having is still the same issue they've had for almost the last 100 years: corrupt leadership and the inability to use or access their resources in an effective manner. Um, Again, they have so much like the rare earth metals in the area are insanely big boom industry, and in South Africa they have some of the best farmland in the world. Um, and so these areas are rich, 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 but unfortunately, due to a multitude of reasons, they have not been able to access these resources or utilize them kind of effectively. Um, that's like a big. That's a again. This is and I guess this is the issue now is that the discussion of the resources there are more important are not really important for these nations, but for the other interested nations of the other interested parties. Let's just say that, and then let's go to South America. Um, South America has been it's been very over the last I would say 5 years has been in a very chaotic place. Like going from again, we can start with Argentina because that's like what everyone's talking about. Um, with Argentina's cut like their massive spending cuts in the government and showing that their economy is booming from it is very interesting, and I guess it's kind of almost going to be a laboratory experiment in a actual libertarian in charge of a country. Um, Again, Argentina, very agriculturally speaking, uh, very productive. Um, the issues with Argentina again, if you want to extend this like to 200 years, Argentina was almost set up to be the United States of the Latin America, but due to political instability, corruption, and distance, along with a multitude of other reasons, they never really have been able to kind of reach the potential of their nation, or at least what the geographical placement of that nation could hypothetically kind of output. Right, Brazil is a mess. Um, there's like almost constant like again the big thing with Latin America, fortunately, is corruption scandals, and Brazil too. So many resources. Unfortunately, it's kind of again hamstrung by corruption. Colombia and Venezuela are. Colombia has like major issues with like constant wars with drug cartels in the south and paramilitary groups. And Venezuela is just such a travesty. They were poised to do really well, but they're not. They're not right now. I know there was an migrant issue. I think in the last 5 years. I don't know. I can't recall the date where lots of Venezuelans were leaving because their money became so worthless. I guess Venezuela had the issue of ran the issues of many petrol states. You can say that where they relied so heavily on the price of oil that when it fell, I think in 2019, um, it really hurt their economy. Lat Again, rest of Latin America, I don't want to come off like I'm just ignoring them or kind of breezing through them like these places. I'm just trying to get a quick like overview of again flashpoint issues, right? We all know what like the fuck that means. Like yeah, and then let's go and then to the global north, right? And we'll say North America. Well, Mexico, and yes, I'm skipping Central America. I know there's a lot going on in Central America, but it's mostly internal. And I guess a big thing I'm trying to focus on for this podcast, or this discussion rather, is kind of outward, outward like policy, outward facing kind of projections of these nations, right? We'll start with North America. We'll do Mexico first. Mexico, I think, it if everything goes well, I think their next 10 years will do be pretty good. Um, with America focusing, with America probably going on a more inward focused direction for at least the next 4 years. I think Mexico will be more and more a big partner in that, because I know, because of cheaper labor, probably we'll probably see more and more American owned factories being opened up in Mexico rather than overseas. Um, I know the I know the standard of living is going up in Mexico. I think the biggest issue Mexico has, is the same one as always had, is cartel activity, specifically in the north, and again, just government corruption. Um, but again, I recall that they're looking for, they're prospecting for rare earth minerals right now in Mexico. I know several American uh, mining organizations are looking, are there. I know they're looking across the Americas for these rare earth metals, just to see if they can find them rather than source them outwardly. Um, and in North America, let's talk about, I guess, the behemoth right now, which is the United States. Um, and they just had their election, uh, which was a upset for the Democrats, to say the least. Um, Politically speaking, there's been lots of, like, and this is, I guess this is the difference why I would discuss also the politics of America, the internal politics of America, over places like sub-Saharan, like South Africa, like Brazil, or like Australia, is because the internal politics of America has a direct effect on the internal politics of many other nations, right? There's a very big cascade that happens with what happens in America affects, for better or worse, like the rest of the world, right? So that's why I would talk about it. Um, so with the election of Donald Trump in the states, it is pro, and with his appointments that have been released over the last several days, we can probably see America going back down a path of protectionism and of internal and more national focus rather than international focus for their political energies. Um, so, which is a very big kind of uh, which is different from the last 4 years. The last 4 years during the Biden administration, um, the international prestige of America has faltered. I will say that it's been faltering, um, and this is where we'll go back to sub-Saharan Africa. A big thing America had going for it was it its kind of prestige, and that a lot of nations were willing, or wanted to rather, work with America, and this has been kind of shown, like, with development initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa. However, during the last, I want to say, 8 to 12 years, that really has faltered. With Trump's first term, we saw him really kind of pulling out of these places. Um, and then with the with Biden, we saw that line was kind of still held, but at the same time, with someone like Biden who did have cognitive issues, it was a kind of low watermark, I want to say, for the states. Um, so with Trump back in the White House, we're probably going to see the international reputation go back up. But I do not think they'll America will never be as involved as it was previously in international politics, other than, I think, protecting key allies and trying to ensure its hegemon status. Um, it currently has interests, let's put it that way, in several key regions. Um, I do not think. I know a lot of people wish to like ascribe kind of either benevolence or malice to this. I if we look at it in the terms of in terms of geopolitics, these regions are most of the regions America is interested in is usually close to shipping lanes, close to key supply regions, in places where they are able to project power, right? So we'll get to that once we kind of get to the current flashpoints. I want to say, but right now, America again the big issue, and another big thing people have been saying about America is civil war, right? I do not think there will ever be. I don't like you never know, but there's most likely never going to be a civil war in the United States. Um, it's just not it's just not feasible. It's the apparatus for that is not really there. You know, the, the question of whether or not a state can secede was addressed previously in the 1800s, and you like we're at the point now where no, so you as a state, right? You cannot you cannot secede. You can like if you want like I know it's a big like touch point where people say, well, we'll secede. Legally speaking, right? Sure, you can, but practically they can't. So I don't think there'll be any states seceding, and for a popular revolt, um, a la kind of like I don't know, like like the Taiping Rebellion, or like the French Revolution of like mass popular uprising. Again, I do not think that's going to happen. I do not think the the American populace is as animated as it would like to believe. I think they would defend themselves from a foreign force, but I do not think the American populace would raise arms against their own government. I just don't see it happening. Um, so I so this is most likely going to be stable. We're probably going to see them focus more so on their key allies and their region. I do think there'll probably be more involvement in North America in the next coming years. Um, but I'll leave everything else to the Flashpoint discussions. And next, let's talk like Canada. Canada has been through, I guess, a difficult, I want to say, 10 years, where due to I would say systemic poor leadership, um, we've had quite a few issues. Um, a big issue is again kind of similar to the states. It was a decline in international prestige. For Canada, the thing is, for Canada, that matters a lot less. It matters a lot less what other nations think of it. The really all that Canada should be worried about is what America thinks of Canada, right? And to strengthen that alliance. It really doesn't matter what like Poland or Croatia or Russia thinks, right? They don't have to like us. They just have to because Canada is lockstep has to be cordial with America. We really don't have any. We border no other nation, and we have no other real strong ally. Which is fine. It's fine when your ally is the world superpower, right? But the big issues facing Canada really is population, lack of innovation, and immigration. So, quickly speaking on this, for population, the big issue is that Canada is too concentrated as a population, right? Um, most of our population lives close to the American border, right? Like the vast majority, and this has led to a lot of problems, to say the least, with like new development, right? Um, the other is immigration. Canada has overloaded on immigration to deal with the fact that for a while labor was really expensive in Canada, right? Labor was extremely expensive, and with and with the imperative, right, of wanting to keep that down, they flooded the market with cheap labor from immigrants, which now has kind of doubled back on itself and has really like entrenched in the idea of the Canadian populace of being anti-immigration, which, look, to be fair, is as a Canadian, is a valid like thing to be anti-immigration. The big issue that Canada faces with that is that kind of serves as a feedback loop. With Canada being, look, Canada is as a nation we're underpopulated, right? The issue is all of our population is so concentrated in few regions that it makes it extraordinarily difficult to kind of develop, and this is where it goes to innovation. We don't really do Canada's really doesn't do anything anymore, right? We don't really make anything. We really are Canada is at the current time of upload we're talking is a quasi feudal state. It is a nation run and basically operated by land owning gentries or land owning peoples over, you know, that kind of reign over a large amount of tenants, right? That's not a healthy. It's stable. Like, don't get me wrong, that's stable, right? That's the kind of the that was the setup for the last like 2,000 plus years, right? However, we're not very competitive because of that, right? When your biggest industry is the housing market, is not really a good look. And geopolitically speaking, what this has made is Canada's been very impotent on the world stage. The only thing Canada has right now is with global warming, we're looking at two good outcomes from it. Canada has nothing but profit to gain from the world getting warmer because it'll open up vast spans of wilderness for habitation. And two, with the Northwest Passage, from warming up that, and with Canada controlling that passage, it opens up a really lucrative trade point. And this is also why I believe America is going to be more invested in what happens in Canada in the next 4 years. Now we're going to jump over the sea, talk about Europe as a whole. Europe is in a difficult spot, right? The European experiment is given mixed results. Right now we're kind of seeing I think Brexit was the last gasp of kind of Euroscepticism. I think it still exists, but I think less and less what the in Europe it seems that there is two kind of opposing views, predominantly speaking, and Europeans, correct me if I'm wrong, about the EU. I don't think the question is the EU good or bad? I think it's what nature do they want what nature do they want for the EU, and what do they want it to look like? I think you have some people like the Germans who seek further centralization, right? They because the thing is the Germans have only profited from the EU, right? Germany, like you have some countries like Germany, like France, like the Netherlands and like Belgium who've profited, right? Because they've been able to kind of use the poorer nations around them to bolster their economy, right? And then you have nations, I think, like Poland, like the Eastern Bloc nations, who want more federalization of it. It's not that they don't. It seems to me rather that it's not that they don't want the EU. They just want it to be structured differently. And again, a big issue they're having right now is immigration from North Africa, and their big issue is, I guess, their energy reliance on very specific nations that we'll get to in a bit. Um, Next, let's talk North Africa. North Africa has been kind of a mixed bag, to say the least. You have like countries like uh, Egypt, right, who are currently have been doing a lot of like large scale development projects. They're trying to. That's like a big one is they're making a new capital because their old one was like a mess, right? You have places like Libya, which is still in a very chaotic state. Then you have Tunisia, which does again like some of these countries, like you never hear about them, right? Which usually is a good thing, right? Then you have Algeria. You have Algeria, and then you have Morocco, right? Algeria and Morocco have had uh, are like not necessarily active conflict. They don't like each other, right? The issues that these countries have more so is in desertification. Well, I want to say desertification, but they just had the flood. Is that they're really reliant on stable weather, and they're reliant. And the issue they have is that they're kind of a point for migrants to go from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe. They do have some oil, but their kind of importance is more so reliant on whom they're kind of cooperating with. That's what it appears to be, right? You know, realistically, many of these nations don't have the ability to project more than outside their borders. Um, their real utility or real like potential rather is their cooperation with other states. I know that many African countries cooperate together or they attempt to. The big issue is Africa is such a large continent, right? You'll never. It's difficult to have cooperation when you have a Moroccan. Like, what does a Moroccan and a Kenyan have in common, right? Like economically speaking, these are very different areas of very different even zones of relevance, right? The next, so the yeah. Next, let's talk about the Middle East. Oh, let's leave the Middle East. The Middle East will just discuss it as a flashpoint. Let's leave that because it's too chaotic. Let's talk about Iran. Yeah, let's talk about Iran. Just like Iran and Pakistan, right? Like central. Let's talk about Central Asia, right? Central Asia is again, it's reliant. Well, the Central Asian Turkic states are more so reliant on their interaction with Russia, put it bluntly, than the rest of the world, right? A lot of these areas are scarcely populated. Um, the food production can vary, and they're really harsh climates. So they're important again, and they're so in a big, I guess, if this was the Middle Ages, right? These areas were super important, right? Central Asia was the Central Asian like steppe was one of the most important regions to look at because so much came out of it, right? Nowadays, it's almost like their central location is only hindering them because they can't really. They have no water access. They're even they want to like have road access. You have to pass through so many other nations, so they're so isolated. Whereas Iran, their their central location is to their benefit, right? They really like their coastal southerly Central Asian location really is such an important zone because they're able to like their with their population and their industry, they're able to have more of an impact on surrounding nations, right? Than someone like Kazakhstan. We're seeing that like right now, right? Um, they're 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 doing well as a nation. You know, they are a mild. The issue Iran has is that they're a pariah state, right? Not everyone wants to work with them, and they're not, and they haven't shaken that status. You know, there's several pariah states kind of existing right now, and they're unfortunately one of them. And into Pakistan. Pakistan is again is a nation that is such like Pakistan and India. These let's talk about both of them. The issue these countries have is over is is so different from everywhere else. It's so fascinating. Their issue is overpopulation, where many places in the world are facing population shortfalls. Another issue that these places have is is ecological neglect. These areas are very poorly husbanded, right? Like by that I mean they're not looked at. Like the ecological areas are not looked after. Um, they're also in a state of almost continual tension, across the border. So yeah, and the thing India has going for it is India is a rapidly growing economy. Rapidly, they have cheap labor, but the issue is that India has is that India is internally chaotic, and I guess the concern there is that and there's and they have such a massive population that's still growing, and in such like unsanitary, let's put it bluntly, unsanitary conditions. We've already seen what a epidemic, right, can do, or pandemic, I should say, a local epidemic that will probably occur, right, in these like highly dense areas where like human and animal are in close contact. It's gonna it it will like be like a major hit to the area. The other issue India has is like their major kind of issues is just pollution and environmental like degradation. They had some days that were so hot no one could leave like the house, right? They're and while they're strategically right a important nation, like they're so important, right? Their location along trade routes is so important. They produce like a massive amounts of like rice, like textiles, super important. I just fear that India's kind of um, rapid rise, like no one like is like shaky. Like I'm not an economist, so I can't tell you whether or not like they're gonna fall like tomorrow, right? But that's just I guess that's we'll leave that there. We're gonna continue on so we get to like I guess kind of a broader overview of everything. Southeast Asia and the Philippines, right? These nations, some of them are more, some of them like Burma, are more closely attached to India and how they're kind of and they kind of follow that line, but most of them are very much focused on one of two nations. It's either America or China, and I guess this is a good place to discuss the Sino-American relations and the Sino-American tension kind of developing, right? So, and we'll start with Southeast Asia and we'll expand. You have some nations in this area are really reliant on China for for protection, for kind of status. They kind of use their relations to China as an avenue of legitimacy and for as a market, right? And some of them are more reliant on America. The big ones reliant on America are Vietnam and the Philippines, right? Vietnam, since the close of the Vietnam War, has slowly moved over to to the Americans, right? Which is very fascinating. It's mostly because Vietnam does not like China. Bec- Point blank, Vietnam, and similar to the Philippines, they were a uh, a protectorate, I believe, of this America, but since liberation, they're really they're really reliant on American protection. Why is that? The South is mostly due to the ownership of the South China Sea and the ownership of the trade going through there. China right now is in the process of further strength of wanting to take a larger role in international politics, right? And one way they can do that is they can secure important trading zones. And the South China Sea is where the vast majority of the world's goods go through. And having ownership of that is to it appears at least to policymakers within China as a key importance. So much so that they're trying to build islands out there. At the same time, the issue is that these zones, these some of these zones are designated international waters and some of them national, right? China's trying to claim it as all as their national waters. That the issue there is that those claims contest with the Philippines and Vietnam specifically. So this is why we're seeing currently a lot of, you know, naval exercises occurring in this region because China's trying to claim it as their own. Right now, to be completely honest, their claim is kind of is it they can claim it all they want. They do not have the naval capacity to challenge um, the Americans' final ruling on this, which is that it is part Vietnam, part Philippine, and mostly I think international. They can't right now. They can't dispute it, and this also kind of extends into Taiwan, right? China, for whatever reason, and if you're talking geoeconomic, like an economic outlook, right? If you're talking about war or conflict as an um, economic contest, right? As like, what do you have to gain from this conflict, right? Which is how to fairly most wars throughout history have been thought, right? I do not see there is no reason for China to fight Taiwan, right? Taiwan has no natural resources. It really doesn't even improve the Chinese naval capacity, right? Um, it seems to me as a prestige objective that the existence of Taiwan um, complicates the legitimacy of the the Chinese Communist Party. That's what it appears. And I think another big sticking point is that because Taiwan has such close relations to America, they probably another thing I believe they see it as how Americans saw Cuba during the Cold War. They don't want a friendly nation of a hostile force that close to their borders, which is understandable. The issue I would I not the issue, the problem with this kind of posturing is that I do not believe China has the capacity to take the island. They don't have the naval capacity. Like they are close to their, it is close to their homeland, which is the benefit. The issue is that if it came to it, I do not think they could win the naval contest. I'm not unless they have like some new developments that they simply have been kept keeping secret. But I do not think they can win that naval contest. So that's a big. Those are the big things. And another big issue between America and China right now is, I said I'd come back to this, is influence in sub-Saharan Africa. Currently, China has put in a lot of work into becoming very friendly with a lot of these South African nations by giving them very large loans for development, and they've been building factories in these nations. a lot of this is because China, no, the China, like another thing when we're discussing kind of geopolitics, we have to believe everyone's acting rationally, right? It's not about like pride or hubris. It's like they're operating as a rational person, as a rational player, rather. China knows that it cannot be the factory of the world forever, right? It cannot. It does not have the population growth to sustain that. So they are looking further afield, and in sub-Saharan Africa, they're finding a large population base that can supply them with that kind of labor. And another thing they are finding there is rare earth metals and raw resources, right? A big thing is that has always kind of existed is a kind of cyclical trade of you have a client state in which you extract the raw resources from, they sell them to you, you refine the products there, and you can sell it back to them. Right? This type of trade was pioneered by the British, by the large colonial empires, and it's still a valid like triangle of trade, right? And I do believe that what we'll see develop is that a similar process in between China and these South African quote unquote client states, right? The other kind of but the issue what we have there with that kind of dynamic is with these America doesn't want to kind of relinquish any type of influence in this region, right? Because it is an important region, right? The issue is kind of circling back to that prestige objective, is American prestige rather. The issue was that America was putting a lot of cultural and moral obligations on the loans and grants they were giving to these nations. Like certain amount had to be earmarked for social development, certain amount had to be earmarked for like oh my god, they had some policies about gender policies within these grants. China, seemingly at least, doesn't really care about that. China really only seems to care about what it can gain rather than what they're doing or how they get it, right? They're not really concerned about the ethics of it, rather, seemingly, where America is. Which means if you are a community, right, where it is quasi despotic or not ethical in the Western sense of the term, right? It is easier for them to ally or cooperate with China rather than America. Um, Whether or not that relationship continues is really reliant on the Chinese willingness to be diplomatic, which we have seen they are less they're less likely to do so, right? And it seems that China is willing to work with you as long as it can. Rather, again, like, sorry, put a big asterisk on that. This is what it appears to me as kind of an outsider. It appears that China is easier to work with, but they expect very specific stuff, like very specific loyalties from those that they work with. America is willing to be your friend and is seemingly willing to be more giving in certain diplomatic avenues, right? You know, America is willing to give you a better trade deal and be flexible on the terms of it, rather than China, who is like very much to the letter, right? And so these kind of dealings in sub-Saharan Africa, we'll see how they kind of bear fruit over the long term. But right now, it does seem that China is pulling ahead in Sub-Saharan Africa. Another thing with China is that we have seen also is the what we've seen rather in the last 10 years is the veneer of communism really falling away, right? I don't think anyone is under any illusion that China is a communist country. It simply is not, right? What China is realistically is an authoritarian capitalist society or command economy or command capitalism. Their government is involved with the economy 100% to get a to deal to make any type of large business in China. You have to be in bed with the CCP, no question. But they're more focused on generating profit rather than more than anything else. And we've seen that with the consolidation of power around Xi Jinping, that really China is going down the avenue of a single party dictatorship. Put it bluntly, right? It does have, whatever they have, their meeting of equals, but realistically, it is a dictatorship, right? With Xi at the top and his party, like dictating to businesses what to do, how to grow, and they're trying to get they're trying to generate as much profit as they can, and it's been working for the last again 10 years. China has been going from strength to strength, even culturally, right? China did not have as much cultural purchase that like 10 years ago compared to now is a world of difference. China now has cultural weight to it. America is a very large cultural hegemon, right? And other nations have this too, like we'll talk about them eventually. Japan has has an outsized to their kind of economics, even like their economic output, a outsized cultural radiation to them. China now, with the use of creation of new social media, video games, even creators, and it has created a cultural output to them, right? Which, geopolitically speaking, is really powerful, because it's a type of soft power that they have. If they can get people within, in their cultural sphere, it's easier. Those nations will find it easier to work with them, right, over the long term. And the big thing with China too is the rehabilitation of its image, which really has been taking off. Again, previously China has always, if you look in the 2000s, right, China was not seen in the context of power. It's seen in the context of a poor backwater, right? What people used to think of China is that they had some rich cities on the coast and it was poor in the interior. Now, right, whether or not that is still the case, China's perception has changed dramatically. And these are all important because this kind of opens up the Sino-American kind of conflict kind of brewing. Both of these countries, right, they have different kind of the competition between these two countries will never ever be military. Both China and America, they're not, again, they are rational actors. They have nothing to gain from open conflict. Nothing. Right now, realistically, their conflict is cultural, their conflict is economic, and their conflict is intelligence, right? Why would either of these countries ever fire a bullet when 20 guys in a computer room can do more damage, like, than a army, right? So this is really where the conflict lies. It's in intelligence, it's in economics, and it's culture. Culture we talk about. Economics, the economic dimension is very interesting. This is why I was discussing earlier how America's interest in leveraging Mexico as a source of consumer goods. China wants to sell to America, point blank, right? They want to. They need to sell to America. America does not want to sell to China. Doesn't want to buy from China because they know and they've seen it that their reliance on China has strengthened them to the point where they are now, right? Where across the world, China is like the place where all your shit is made, right? So with that dimension, kind of, you know, going around right now, we saw it under Trump where they were, you know, increasing tariffs, refusing to sell, finding new partners. That we're gonna see that I think grow. I know Xi doesn't. No one like Xi doesn't want it to happen. I think Xi would rather, work with America. But I think right now, Americans' more national focused interests now, they do not want to strengthen a potential enemy. So I do not think that there. I do think that going forward, you're going to see the growth again in that kind of conflict. The other things that kind of, again, touching on this flashpoint. This is, I guess, one of the lesser flashpoints, honestly, is what we see what we see in the demographics of China, right? And this is where this may change everything. Demographically, China is not a healthy country. It is a declining country and rapidly aging. You also have, due to certain policies implemented to curb birth rates in the 80s and 90s, what we see is a lot of single men who will most likely never have a partner due to gender disbalances in the country. And what we also see is that what this kind of the issue, or not the issue, the concern with that is if you have a country that is predominantly young men that will never going to have a kid, what this often kind of leads to is it is a disquieted population, right? Because if a guy has like no job, no kid, and no partner, they really don't have anything to lose, and so they're more willing to take risks, and that could lead to a whole bunch of cascading effects. Another thing that is a concern, I think, and this is, I guess, not a flashpoint, I guess because it's already happened, is the concern of epidemics, right? I spoke briefly over this with India and how the conditions there kind of are kind of like good for an epidemic. What we saw with COVID, and in China specifically, is what we saw was an epidemic start there, a virus spread there, and then infect the world. Well, that makes perfect sense because China, as a massive exporter of everything, of course, it's going to spread everywhere. The question, I think, in the minds of everyone should be is what was the nature of that disease of COVID? And let's be completely honest now. It's 2024. Let's be honest. COVID was not a natural disease. I am of the belief COVID was a lab created disease. And I think what happened is that it escaped the lab. What I've heard was that COVID was designed to kill Uyghurs in China, but that is a blatant rumor. I'm not sure if that's true, but COVID was created, right? In what the and escaped containment and infected the world. Now, here's the question that everyone should think, right? If China is doing this, right, who else is? And this, I think, goes on, is going to touch on the major kind of sort of one of the many swords of Damocles over our proverbial heads, and that is unknown biological experiments, right? There are so many pathogens kind of in the ether, kind of just like around. They've always been around, but kind of like in the back doing shit, right? A big one is TB, like drug resistant TB, right? That's one that's kind of spreading around the back. What is more concerning than those kind of, quote, like natural or wild variants is what are these scientists doing with diseases in the lab? There was a issue in Canada where they sent COVID samples from Canada to China unbeknownst of the government, right? That is most likely happening more than we think in many countries. So I don't it's not a question of if there is going to be another COVID, it's when, right? I think that's what everyone has to be comfortable with, is that there will be another escapee, there will be another release of a virus. But anyway, that's besides the point. Um, Now let's briefly talk on Japan. Japan has not been good since the, I guess, 90s. They've been in a kind of state of decline, or stagnation is a rather better term. Their issue is more so housing affordability, similar to Canada, and their kind of over tourism. That's a big thing. Them and South Korea, what South Korea I could say is similar to Japan, just their economy is growing. Put it bluntly. A big issue Japan is facing though is aging population. They have an extremely low birth rate, and they are aging out. This is to make a country. This is like the death nail of a country. Like, I'll be completely frank. If Japan does not do something in the next 50 years, Japan's gonna be unrecognizable. It will have an economic, like, Japan will not be healthy economically speaking, unless there's a major revolution in like production. It will not be, point blank. There's too many old people and not enough young people. An old person does not contribute to the growth of the economy and does not pay towards the state. Young people do. What you're going to have is you're going to have a country and economy that is stuck on their island and unable to do anything. They'll probably stabilize. Like, that's the thing. That's the kind of the myth of population demographics. It's going to stabilize. It's not like no one doesn't have a kid. It's going to stabilize. But the issue, it's going to stabilize, but to get to that point is going to be extraordinarily painful. Right? So that's Japan. And now let's talk Russia. Russia is the boogeyman right now, quote unquote. Realistically, if Russia did not have a nuclear arsenal, no one would care. They are not a major economy. They're also an aging population. They have a massive country that is so disconnected with itself, and with so many autonomous regions in Oblast, it's so clunky, right? And now let's get to this next flashpoint, is the war in Ukraine, right? This war, I don't care how it's spun, it is Russia attempting to basically establish themselves economically going forward, right? Why are they fighting Ukraine? They want Black Sea. They want continuous Black Sea access. They got that with Crimea. The issue is that Crimea, as a peninsula, can be easily cut off. They want the region. They want that the Donbass region and the region bordering the Black Sea to ensure Black Sea access. Why? Russia does not have a stable warm water port that can't be blockaded. Right now, they have St. Petersburg, which is located on the other end of the Baltic Sea. It can be cut off by Denmark at a moment's notice. It's expensive to get to there anyway. They had some in the Arctic, but they freeze. Their only other warm access sea is Vladivostok, which is located within the Sea of Japan, which again can be quite easily blocked off. So they have to pass through, like every port they have must pass through choke points. And the question is, like, okay, why don't they build it somewhere else? Because no one lives there. Russia is the largest nation on the planet, and similar to Canada, no one is living there. It is huge, and it is wild, and it is difficult to live there. So this war in Ukraine is simply put a strategic war to secure a warm water port. Let's be honest. The port, this port, like the Black Sea, isn't a good option either, right? But it allows Russia to get a foothold in the Black Sea. Another thing I think that is really pushing this war forward is perceived time, like perceived time crunch, right? Russia, similar to China, has an aging population. They know within a generation they won't have the military ability to do this, right? They just simply won't. They are attempting to strike now when they can. The big contention with the war from the start was the perception that Ukraine, I think, was the hero, quote unquote, the popular imagining, and Russia was the villain. These are two nations, both equally flawed, that are unable to, or should not be able to be seen as ethical actors, right? Because they're not. They're not. Neither are ethical, right? They're simply actors. What we see now is, what we saw during the war is that a lot of money was funneled in Ukraine, which led to major popular displeasure in multitudes of nations, right? And it has amounted to nothing. Let's be real. Ukraine, whatever money that was sent to Ukraine, basically got burned in the war, right? Because this type of war they're fighting is a zero-sum game, right? There is nothing nothing to gain from an outside party getting involved, other than to stymie Russia. That's it. But whatever money was spent is burned or embezzled, most likely, right? Now what we're seeing is no one really cares anymore, right? About this war. No one cares. The West has lost interest. There's no social kind of motivation to keep helping the Ukrainians fight. So this is why now we're seeing pushes from America, from the EU, from multitudes of nations for Ukraine to talk. Most likely what we're going to see within the next couple of years is they're going to talk, and where the battle lines stand is where the new borders will be. Most likely Ukraine's going to lose, and it's going to lose big. And I don't see a bright future for Ukraine post this war. I really don't. You see, unlike Russia, while Russia is losing money and manpower, they're not fighting on their country. They're not losing buildings, and they're not turning up farms. Ukraine is. So I don't see Ukraine being a healthy state post this war, which I do believe will be ending shortly. The next flashpoint is the Middle East, which has been always a flashpoint, and this is the Ukraine-Palestine conflict. What we have in going on is both of the Ukraine, the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel is a pariah. Let's be frank. So is Palestine. These are both nations that really do not go by the perceived norms of conduct. Neither of them. These nations, I believe, there will always be conflict in this region, right? Let's look at Israel first. Israel is a let's put it bluntly, Israel is a nationalistic state. They are nationalists, period, right? They believe that the whole nation is built around the concept of Jewish identity. Point blank, right? And they wish to expand, right? That's why they get a lot of Jewish people can move there. That's why when they are there, if you have a lot of kids, you get massive grants. They wish for that nationality to grow. Palestine, similarly, has a very similar ethos to Israel. Both these nations are nationalists. They both hold claim to the same piece of land, right? The reason why this conflict has always been constantly going is that the Arabs in the area hate Israel and Israel hates them, and both of them see other as a mutual as an enemy, and as unreconcilable enemies. They both hold that area to be holy ground, and they both wish to claim it, right? The issue is, once again, these are prestige objectives. The area of the Levant these areas don't hold much strategic value in and of themselves, right? What Israel holds, the reason why Israel exists really is as a basically staging point for Americans to project power into the Middle East. That is my belief. They're there as a place for Americans to project power. The other nations simply hate the fact that nation is there and they want them gone, right? Neither of these, in this discussion, I'm not going to discuss like war crime, right? I'm not going to discuss how they wage their war, or how they view this war and what context they view it, because it really, to this discussion, doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that who is going to win and what is the outcome. Realistically, unless another party gets involved, most likely Palestine, the question of Gaza and of Palestine and the two states will be settled shortly in favor of Israel. The Palestinians will be removed. That's what I believe. Unless other Arab nations get involved, which most likely they won't. Because I guess another big issue is that a lot of Arab identity isn't as, in this region really, and globally too, isn't as unified as Jewish identity. The Saudis and the Israelis get along really, in the Gulf states in general, get along with Israel fairly well. Because these, and why, right? Because they're all American allies. The Gulf states are staunchly American allies. Saudi Arabia is an American ally. Israel is an American ally. These other nations really are not, or they're kind of America adjacent, right? That's kind of the crux of this. This, at any point, this conflict can end if the hegemon United States gets involved decisively. The thing is, America doesn't have the political capital or the will to really get involved on either side to delegate, right? They've sent envoys, but the issue is that Israel again is a like is a pariah state. They don't really operate in a context that is normal to international relations, right? They simply do not. But so the issue is that so is Palestine, and so what we're going to probably see is this conflict continue, and eventually it decisively end in favor of Israel. And what does that mean, largely speaking? Largely speaking, it will not change the chessboard in this region at all. What you might see is you probably will see a growing coalition of neighboring states against Israel. Whether or not they're successful, I will see, right? We have to remember that in the 50s, during the Sinai War, Israel was able to push all the way to the Suez while fighting Syria, Egypt, and Jordan, like Syria and Egypt, on two fronts, right? Granted, a lot of a lot of the benefits Israel had at the time was better equipment and better, more coordinated leadership, and the Arab forces, has like the officers wouldn't discuss didn't coordinate properly. But will we see that again? Most likely not. So I guess to end off the discussion on the Middle East, what is the most likely outcome, or what is the the outcome of the conflict? Honestly, probably nothing. You're not going to see any major changes in the balance of power in this region. Realistically, the existence of Palestine at all, up until this point, was was kind of just like a charity almost. Realistically, they would not have existed forever. The thing, what I think, the outcome is that Israel right now has very little goodwill as a nation, with everyone else. They really don't have much goodwill or outside of I want to say North America. But even still, I think that when this conflict ends decisively in their fashion, and looking at the kind of what the leadership of the nation's been saying, I do not think going forward Israel will have as much support as it once did. All right, now that's kind of the nations, and I guess now in broad strokes, what do we see? What is the state of the world? There's a lot of doomerism, I think, right now, talking about how like I was discussing Civil War, that things are going just bad, right? Realistically, it's not put a cap on that. It's not that bad. We have conflict, but there's always been conflict, right? I think that is the myth of the postmodern era, is that conflict between nations will never happen again, right? Look, I think a big thing we have to become comfortable with is that there will be conflict and there will be war, right? We've been kind of isolated from that since the fall of the USSR. The world's been kind of free from that idea, and we've been freed from a lot of, realistically been free, the average person's brain has been freed from the woes of disease, war, famine, and under the illusion that things will always kind of project upwards, right? You will always make more money than your parents did, and et cetera, et cetera. Realistically, that's not how things work, right? Human development isn't a arrow, right? It's kind of a sine wave. Sometimes you get high, sometimes you get lows, right? Are we at a low? No. Are we, you average listener, will you be better off than your parents? Probably not, right? Looking at the outcomes, it's you're probably not gonna make more money than your parents, and you will probably face like disease. You'll probably face more war, and society probably will change irrevocably due to new technological advancements. Um, but you know, it's not that bad, right? You can't like. What are you gonna do? That's the big. That's why there's the Pepe with the Snuggie with the nuke going on. What are you like? What are you gonna do? We can't do anything, right? A lot of these things are happening so beyond our control that we can't really affect any change, right? So I would say don't worry about it, right? Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. Focus if you want to focus your energies like on change. Focus on like local politics, right? Like city councils or town councils or what have you. Try to make your area better, and I'm sure that you'll get more like you'll see the changes better there than anywhere else. Um, but don't worry too much, right? Like nukes can fly tomorrow. What are we gonna do? Just gonna roast marshmallows. Just chill. Just relax. Enjoy the enjoy the wave. I guess. Um, it's like I guess this was such a broad kind of sweeping overview. I feel like I said nothing. Um, but I guess you want I'll end it with what I think. Like what do I think about the world rather than like kind of trying to be more objective. I think like it's not like I think it's interesting to say the least. I'm more kind of been like ambivalent to it all at this point. I got too old for this shit. Uh, it's kind of fun to watch, really. I don't really, I care more for history than current politics, but I just felt like this was a because like everyone's fucking talking about it. And I'm sure if the algorithm picks this up, I'll get like maybe 5 views. So I have no idea how long this is. I'm not gonna edit it. I'm just gonna post it. I don't give a shit. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what I think. I guess in closing thoughts, yeah, it's not that bad. It could be way worse. It's probably gonna get worse. So enjoy the wave. Uh, Snuggle up. Eat some food. And yeah, right. That's it.